Hello and welcome to this week's video on simplified openings. In this video, we will take a look at what I think is the simplest possible line against the English opening with black. Now, you may know that some weeks ago, I published a chessable course, 1c4 Simplified, which looks at the English opening from white's perspective. And while I was choosing the lines, obviously, I was forced to take a look at all the lines in the English opening and choose some variations for white. And we usually associate the English opening with white's development of the light squared bishop to g2, fianchettoing it. And I was primarily looking at these lines. However, I found that the theory there is so vast and the black has a wide array of different lines that give him more than satisfactory play. So I decided against that. And one of the main reasons why I decided against these lines with g3 in my course is the line I'm going to show you today. The line looks pretty primitive at first sight, but it has been used on more than one occasion by Magnus Carlsen and then pretty much everybody else. So let me show you why I chose a different approach in my repertoire 1c4 Simplified. So c4, e5 for black. And now white can start with knight c3 or g3. And the good thing for black is that this line works very nicely against both. Mind you, this is only a line that deals with the white's plan of g3. In this video, I'm not going to show you how to deal with the alternative setups by white here, for example, starting with d3 or a3, even though something similar to what I'm going to show you is very likely possible. So we can start with knight c3, just to show you that what happens after g3. After g3, you can even surprise your opponent with what has for decades been considered a very amateurish way to play against the English opening, and that's the move d5. So cd5, queen d5, attacking the rook on h1, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, and now, like, really the dumbest possible move, queen d8, yeah? Bishop g2, knight f6. And we have actually a transposition to the lines that we are going to look at later on. So this is the way how to transpose to the line we're going to look at after second move g3. So knight c3 by white, knight f6. Now knight f3, again g3, d5, cd5, knight d5, bishop g2, and knight f6. This is the key move in this variation for black. I will explain it a bit further down the road. So knight f3, knight c6, defending the pawn on e5, obviously. Yeah, g3, this is the traditional way of playing the English opening. But like I said, the line I'm going to show you is the reason why, one of the main reasons why I decided against it in my chessable course. In order to prevent the move d5, in fact, in the course, I proposed the lines with the move e4. So controlling the d5 square and pretty much never allowing d5. So this is obviously a possible move. Doesn't give an advantage to white. Nothing really does. But it's just a way to steer the game in a different direction. And black here has two good main theoretical moves. One is bishop c5 and the other one is bishop b4. You can explore this on your own and pretty much I'm sure you can find positions that you like. So let's stick to the traditional way, g3 and d5. There are other moves as well, obviously. There is bishop c5, there is bishop b4, yeah, there is even knight d4. And all these were very difficult to deal with when I was analyzing the English from the white side. So I just decided to take a shortcut, yeah, avoid all the lines and play e4. But okay, in this video, we go for d5, cd5, knight d5, bishop g2, and now for many decades, the main move has always been considered the move knight b6. So black plays in a traditional reverse dragon style, like the classical variation against the dragon. Let's say short castle, bishop e7, and then the bishop goes to e6, short castle, f6, queen d7, rooks come into the center, a5 to stop a3 and b4, and so forth. So this line was immensely popular, I would say some maybe more than 5 years ago or something like that. Everybody was playing it with both sides and theory developed massively. There's still nothing wrong with it. But, you know, theory develops in these cycles, you know, when the massive amount of theory grows around one line, even though if that line is good for, let's say, one side, that side still seeks some sort of a shortcut to avoid the theory, just being practical, not having to remember everything all the time. And that move, actually, that shortcut here is the move knight f6. It appears really silly, amateurish maybe, yeah, dropping the knight back because the knight is exposed on the d5 square thanks to that fianchettoed bishop. So dropping it back to f6 looks silly, but the main advantage is that black's play from this moment onwards is really automatic. There are just only two things you need to be careful about when it comes to move orders, but the piece setup actually is automatic, straightforward. You basically can't make a mistake. So the first, I will mention now the two move order subtleties that you need to be aware of. And then we will go on to a bit deeper exploration of how the game can develop. No, not knight b5. So the first subtlety is that um, you should not play bishop d6. Okay, that's the setup that black is aiming for. Bishop d6, short castle, h6, bishop f5, queen d7, and rook fe8. Okay, we will see this setup how it works, but you should not play bishop d6 before white has played d4. So to show you, short castle, and now not bishop d6 because that decreases the control over the d4 square and white can play d4 in one go. So wait for bishop d6 until white has played d3. And the second idea is that once white has played d3, okay, let's say d3 here, that creates the positional threat of bishop g5, attacking this knight on f6 and increasing control of the central squares. And d3 should always be met by the move h6. So stopping basically bishop g5. So these are the two things you need to remember about the move orders. Don't play bishop d6 before white has played d3. And once white has played d3, remember that the threat is bishop g5, so play h6 to stop it. And that's pretty much about it. Now, I would expect white players to always go here something like castles, d3, a3, aiming for b4, and so forth in typical Sicilian style. But in fact, if you switch the engine on, you would see that the engine's main recommendation here is the move b4. So unless white is really well prepared, I wouldn't expect white to play that. But the move is actually interesting, and it was played in a high-level game between Pragnananda and Carlsen at the World Cup in Baku, and this was a classical game, so it was a serious game. And it's worth noting that Carlsen relied on this line, knight f6, in such a critical game, the final of the World Cup against Pragnananda with the black pieces. So he faced this move b4. So we should take a look at it. So before, the idea is to expand on the queen side before black has a chance to go a5 and stop that expansion. Now the idea of b4 is the tactics after bishop b4 is knight e5, knight e5, queen a4 check. Okay, attacking the bishop, and black well will have to give back the extra piece. Knight c6, bishop takes c6 check, bc, queen b4, and white is clearly better here with the better structure, and black's position is obviously full of kind of ruins, yeah, on the queen side. So that's the tactical justification of b4. So Carlsen played bishop d6 following the intended setup in this line, yeah, and now b5. If something like a3, short castle, bishop b2, rook e8, black is fine. Let's say d3 and knight d4, jumping in the center. This is one of black's main ideas, apart from the setup I mentioned, bishop f5 and queen d7, intending bishop h3. So when black finishes development, the knight jumps to d4. So Pragnananda went b5, and now knight d4, jump in the center. Yeah. Now black just wants to castle and finish development. Queen a4. It's notable that both players played very exact chess in this game, basically following the top choices of the engine. So very high quality game. So now the knight on d4 is attacked. So Carlsen goes knight f3, bishop f3, castles for black, castles for white, and now Carlsen played the move a6. It's useful to have this tension on the queen side because white will likely never take ba6, because then after rook a6 it activates black's rook. And it doesn't just, well, it just put some tension on white on the queen side, always having to think about what to do with that pawn on b5, especially at black at the later stage can play bishop d7 and still further attack that pawn. So d3 by Pragnananda, and now remember the rule of thumb, yeah, the threat is bishop g5, so Carlsen goes h6. And pretty satisfactory position for black out of the opening. I can show you a few more moves because the game continued to be equal. White played bishop a3, developing, intending to exchange the dark squared bishops, and now rook b8. This is another idea when you have this tension on the queen side. The rook is removed from the pin on a8, and now ab5 is a threat. And the tactical justification of the move is that ba6 doesn't really work because bishop d7, suddenly it's a problem for white to maintain the queen in a square from where it still defends the bishop on a3. So queen a5 b6 or queen b3 ba6, white will lose material. So Pragnananda took on d6, bishop takes d6, c takes d6, and if now let's say ba6 ba6, this is just an equal position, symmetrical pawn structure, not real weaknesses because the pawn is protected. So Pragnananda went through kb1, and now ab5, queen b5, bishop d7, queen b6, bishop c6, and Carlsen equalized without problems. The game was drawn, and the tactical justification is the pawn is not lost. Bishop c6, bc, queen c6, rook c8 wins the knight on c3. So this is the analysis of the move before. Like I say, I don't expect to see it by unprepared players, whereas all the other moves would transpose to more or less the tabia we are looking at. So for example, if white starts with d3, the threat is bishop g5, we go h6, castle, bishop d6, here we are. The move a3 is possible, and now black can choose. He can go a5 to stop b4, okay? But it's also possible not to bother about it and go castles, go h6, waiting for d3, bishop d6, and then after b4 to play a6. We will take a look at these positions a bit later on as well. So let's say castles, and now important, again, no bishop d6 because of d4, but h6 first. And now d3. Perhaps it's worth noting that a move like b3 is possible. The idea is that black needs to decide what to do with the development of the bishop on f8, and bishop d6 is again met by d4. So with this in mind, black can either go bishop e7 or bishop b4, which is the engine's preferred move. And the idea of bishop b4 is that at some point black can consider taking on c3 and pushing e4. And then the bishop pair that white has will not really matter because the bishop on g2 will be very passive. So an illustrative line, let's say a3, forcing the exchange, bishop c3, dc, castles, queen c2, and e4. Rook d1, queen e7, let's say. And now when the knight moves from f3, if it goes somewhere to e2 or d2, bishop f5 comes, and this excellent defense of the pawn on e4 makes the bishop on g2 really passive. And in case of knight d4, rook d4, again bishop f5 means that this pawn is very strong and white's pair of bishops don't really matter. So this is an illustrative line. Okay, white can continue with bishop b2, but again castles a3, bishop c3, and again e4. Yeah, so if knight moves, let's say knight e1, knight d4 is possible. Yeah, centralizing the knight and the pawn, and bishop f5, really good position for black. In case of, let's say, knight e5, bishop e5, rook e8 with tempo. Yeah, defending that pawn, bishop f5 next. Again, excellent position for black. So again, sideline, I don't expect it to feature too often. So d3, now once d3 is played, bishop d6, and here we are. Now it's worth noting that if white insists on playing d4 with the tempo down, that h6 move is an extra tempo and well, avoids bishop g5 ideas, and the position is equal. Let's say castles, d takes e5, knight e5, and black really has no problem. c6 will follow at some point to blunt this Fianchetto bishop. Let's say queen c2, knight f3, bishop f3, c6, rook d1, queen e7, with really comfortable development. Yeah, the bishop can go to h3, rooks can come to the center, and really no problems for black. So in this position already, white needs to decide whether to go for, like main ideas would be to go for to fianchetto the dark squared bishop with a3 b4 or with b3 immediately. Yeah, so these are the main ideas. So b3 has been played quite a bit. Normally, as white expects a3 to be made by a5, so white wants to develop faster, okay, not to allow this a5 and just to keep more flexibility on the queen side. So castles, rook b, bishop b2, rook e8, and this is the setup we are aiming for. Rook is coming to 8, e8, bishop goes to f5, queen comes to d7, and then the main ideas for black are going bishop h3, exchanging the light squared bishop, or going rook a d8, knight d4, playing the center. Okay, and this is the core of the whole system for black. That's why I say this is really the simplest way to play against the English opening. It's so simple, so straightforward, nothing extraordinary to invent or anything, just plain simple moves, elementary even, yeah, and you get a good position. So what more can you ask of from the opening? So rook c1, bishop f5, yeah. Now, okay, what to do for white? Knight d2, for example, is a move we can look at. There is also knight a4, okay? And just to show you, okay, it's a natural move. The knight wants to jump to c5. But just to show you that it's possible to allow that even with a tempo and so forth. Queen d7, let's just follow our plan. In the game Moroni Nakamura played online, Nakamura decided to avoid that attack and went queen c8, which is perfectly fine as well. And after knight c5 to go knight d8. Okay, defending this pawn on b7, intending c6, and intending bishop h3. Okay, this is, let's say, a more subtle way to play. But it's not even necessary. Okay, let's just go bluntly queen d7, knight c5, bishop c5, rook c5, and bishop h3. This ensures that white does not have the bishop pair after the exchange of the light squared bishops. And again, very solid position for black in the center. Rook a8, maybe e4 will happen at some point if this pin remains. Okay, then black can also drop back with the queen to defend the pawn on c7, jump knight d4, and so forth. Okay, first e5 needs to be developed. One way or another, comfortable position for black. So knight d2 has been played more often, and queen d7. So here we are. And now the threat is obviously to go bishop h3. Yeah. So let's see what if white would play the natural move rook e1 to avoid the exchange of bishops, bishop h3, and now bishop h1. Okay, avoiding the exchange of bishops. This would be I would say a natural reaction by somebody who, okay, maybe is not quite certain whether they should allow the exchange of light squared bishops or not. It's interesting that in this position the engine's preference is the move bishop c6, but this is like not something that a player would do lightly. Yeah, giving up the bishop pair and leaving the king, well, with weak light squares around it. But still, it's possible. It leads to unclear play, bc6, queen c2, and now knight d5. Using the fact that the pawn is controlling the d5 square, knight d5, introducing knight b4 ideas, which attack the queen, defend the pawn on c6, yeah, or simply taking on c3 and going c5, establishing a pawn center. So white has obviously compensation for the bishop pair and the weak light squares in view of the double pawns, but this is an unclear position, generally speaking. Bishop h2, I would say, would be more natural. Yeah? And now an interesting move an idea to have in mind, the move rook a b8. Okay, just defending the pawn on b7 and allowing for knight d4. And here I would like to show you a tactic which is quite cute. Knight c4, let's say continuing with the plan, bishop c5. Yeah, avoiding the exchange and also introducing this tactic of knight bishop f2, knight g4, and so forth. So to illustrate, yeah, a3, bishop f2 check, king f2, knight g4, king g1, and b5. And all of a sudden you see that the knight is short of squares because knight d2, knight e3 traps the queen. Yeah. A cute little tactic. Yeah. Otherwise, black regains the piece with, again, an unclear position, especially thanks to the weakened position of the white king. An alternative is to go knight e4, for example, but again, to show you the this central play by black, takes on e4, bishop e4, bishop b4, forcing the exchange of bishops because the rook has nowhere to go. So bishop c3, take on c3, rook c3, and knight d4. And now we have a really excellent knight on d4, which gives black even some advantage in this position. So you see, it's very simple, very natural play by black. Go bishop h3, jump with the knight to d4, maybe precede it with rook b8 and so forth. So this is the analysis of the move b3. Now a3 is the alternative. And again, like I said, black can go a5 and stop the queenside expansion, or can just ignore it. So let's just explore both options. Let's say castles, b4, rook e8, just playing automatically. Now if b4, knight d4, okay. So bishop b2 and a6, just stopping b5, yeah, and making sure it pretty much never happens. So rook c1, and now bishop f5 would be our choice with queen d7, bishop h3, or the same all the time, yeah. But in the game, so Carlsen, which we are following now, Carlsen actually played the move bishop e6, yeah? And this is a possible way also with the same idea of queen d7, and the idea is okay, you have a bit better control over the d5 square. Yeah. So okay, an alternative. There you go. You can vary from time to time. So knight a4, queen d7. You see, Carlsen is playing again in exactly the same way. So played knight c5, bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, and bishop h3. You see, absolutely the same. You allow knight c5, you just chop it off, go bishop h3, exchange those bishops, and you're fine. Bishop takes h3, queen takes h3. Yeah, and now the idea is to go rook a8, just play in the center. Yeah, maybe a4 ideas, maybe knight d4 ideas, depending on circumstances. Yeah, mind you, if the knight moves from f3, knight g4 would be kind of nasty. There would be mating threats. So here, So decided to stir up the position by taking on e5 with the bishop. Now Carlsen had two ways how to obtain good play. One was knight g4, yeah, attacking the bishop, and when the bishop retreats, okay, sorry, with the arrows, bishop goes back, and now knight d8. This is a very nice idea, yeah. And the idea is to go knight e6, chase away that rook, and then maybe even go knight g5, attacking the knight that is defending against mate. So this is quite dangerous for white, in fact. He decided on knight d7, a double attack, and the bishop and the rook. Bishop takes c7, rook ac8, bishop f4, knight c5, bc5, and queen e6. So quite an unclear position. White has 2 pawns for the exchange. Black has the exchange. Yeah, chances for both sides, but eventually Carlsen won from this position. So you see, it's perfectly possible to allow white to go b4 and not stop it. Yeah, but let's say you decide to stop it. Okay, you go a5. Okay, and now again, wide array of options for white, but like more like about the move orders rather than the plans, because the plan is mostly will be to develop the dark squared bishop, and that goes again with b3, bishop b2, because again, white can develop it on d2 or e3, but first of all, that doesn't alter black's plans. And for example, putting the bishop on e3 after, let's say, castles, rook c1, rook e8, white should always be worried about some knight g4 ideas, as the bishop is not very stable on e3. That's one of the advantages of dropping the knight to f6 early on. Yeah. So mostly players have played here the move b3, developing the bishop to b2. We can also check the move d4, which we checked in a different version after castles. But we'll check it here because it was played in a pretty recent game between Zwardon and Svidler. And Svidler really obtained an advantage in this structure, in this string structure. So castle, we already know that the exchanges in the center lead to an equal position. Just to illustrate, let's say d5, knight e5, knight b5, let's say going after the bishop. But knight f3 check, bishop f3, bishop h3 with tempo developing. Yeah. Rook e1 and avoiding the exchange bishop e5 and preventing the develop of the bishop on c1 by attacking b2. c6 will come next, no problems whatsoever. And another possible change in the structure, d5, let's say, knight e7. This is perfectly fine for black, as the Ragozin defense has shown us many years ago. And let's say knight d2, bishop d7, knight c4, and now b5. Knight d6, d6, cd6, and really excellent position for black. Nice space advantage on the queen side. No bad pieces. Okay, good bishop, light squared bishop because the pawns are on the dark squares. White's bishop on g2 is pretty passive, so the advantage of the pair of bishops doesn't really count. So no problems for black here either. So in the game, white played knight b5. And now Swidler could have gone for ed4 and simplifications in an equal position, but he decided to be more ambitious and went for e4. And after knight d2, he played rook e8. Yeah, bishop f5 again was perfectly fine. Yeah, bishop rook e8, knight c4, bishop f8, dropping the bishop back, e3, bishop g4, queen c2, queen d7, and again we see this battery of on the h3 c8 diagonal. Now the bishop is on g4, not on f5. Queen is on d7, but the threat is still bishop h3 and attack on the king side. Yeah, it's a pretty pleasant reversed French structure for black, and already an advantage on move 15. So this is the let's say the d4 move, which again I don't expect to be seen too much. Mostly, like I said, players have played b3, castles, bishop b2, rook e8. And here again, we have something similar to what we looked at. At the risk of being repetitive, again, we'll say that black is really played really simple. Bishop comes out, queen d7, queen h3. So what we're looking here, what we can actually draw the conclusion is that in these structures, the move e3 for white, which may look natural because it controls the d4 square, is rarely good. And it's rarely good because that bishop on f5 is actually quite well placed to target the d3 pawn. So, to illustrate, let's say e3, bishop f5, queen e2, queen d7, just following automatically. Yeah, rook fd1, and now bishop g4. And this is very unpleasant. No h3, because the queen is on d7 controlling that square. And the threat is here already queen f5, queen h5 to enhance that pin on the knight on f3. So remember this maneuver, queen f5, queen h5. Yeah. And it's already kind of becoming frustrating for white. So black already has some advantage in the game Illingworth against Vidit played online. Another game that featured the e3 move after rook c1, bishop f5, h3. This is another idea that white can try, h3, king h2, queen d7, king h2, avoiding the exchange of the bishops. But now we know, okay, black is almost finished with the development. Knight jump in the center, knight d4. Okay, no problems. Yeah, knight d2, c6. And now e3, let's say, yeah. So the game we are following is the game Ding against Carlsen, played online in 2020. And here Carlsen had a very interesting sacrifice. Bishop takes d3, ed4, ed4 with excellent compensation. Yeah, probably he will get some material back, but will also get two massive pawns in the center. But he played the more positional knight b5, knight b5, cb5, again with equal position, and we see that e3 is always weakening the pawn on d3. So equal position at this stage, but Carlsen actually went on to win. And again, to show you problems with the e3 move, let's say knight d2, bishop e6, bishop f5 again is possible, but this is kind of luring white to play e3, e3, let's say, queen d7, and now knight d4. Okay, and this has been played actually by Kramnik, but again, e3, okay, possible, but gives black a pretty good game. So here, for example, the simplest is just to take knight e4, and d4 is also rarely good for white in this structure, simply because black plays f6. There is very good central control over the e5 pawn, so any f4 ideas would just be met by silence, yeah, because e5 is just well protected, and black has good prospects on the queen side, whether advancing with b5, depending on circumstances. Let's say knight d5, knight e7, and now queen can drop to d8 to control the b6 square, then go c6, get rid of the knight, and then maybe slowly play on the queen side. And if knight e4, that's just simply bishop f8, and now again we see the problems with that pawn. Yeah, rook a d8, and the pawn on d3 is under attack. In the game Kramnik-Niemann, played online this year. Black played knight bishop e7, knight f6, bishop f6, and it was still fine. Queen c2, rook a d8. Yeah, again, no problems. He continued with bishop h3, and bishop f5 was also possible. Bishop g4 to attack a rook on d1 was also possible. So black was already fine. And that's pretty much about it. You see, I mean, I think I went a bit more into detail to give you a better overview of White's possible plans against the black setup. But as you could see, first of all, White does not have a big variety of plans, and second, Black's play is really simple, straightforward against any of White's plans. So the only thing, like I said, the two things you needed to remember about the move order, when to play h6, when to play bishop d6, and then the setup is really automatic: bishop f5, queen d7, rook e8, going for bishop h3 or knight d4, and so forth. So this will be it for this week. I hope you liked and enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you smash that subscribe button, and let me know what you think in the comments. If you try this line in your practice, let me know how it goes, and I'll be happy to reply. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you soon again next week. And in the meantime, follow my shorts. Take care. Bye.